Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Aaron Morrill, the founder and editor-in-chief of the Jersey City Times. I'll be moderating today's program, which is a joint presentation of the Regional Plan Association and the Jersey City Times. The Regional Plan Association is an independent, not-for-profit regional planning organization founded in 1922 that focuses on recommendations to improve the quality of life and economic competitiveness of the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut metropolitan area. Headquartered in New York City, it has offices in Princeton, New Jersey, and Stamford, Connecticut. The program today will focus on the RPA's recent report, Housing Jersey City, Assessing Current and Future Gaps. As many of you know, development and affordability are burning issues for Jersey City residents. You'll find the issue at the very top of the platforms of this year's candidates for mayor and city council. We know from multiple studies that Jersey City consistently ranks among the top 3 most expensive rental markets in the country. The scarcity of affordable housing has pushed many people out of Jersey City. We recently reported that Jersey City's Black population fell last year in a city that's growing. On a personal level, I know a young woman with a growing family who recently moved to Philadelphia because of the lack of affordable options here. If you live here, you know someone like her. Spoiler alert, in its report, RPA finds that Jersey City could face a housing gap ranging between 27,000 and 36,500 units by the end of year 2032. Even if all the units in the pipeline are built in the next decade, the housing deficit would still range between 13,000 and 22,500 units. How effective Jersey City is in addressing the housing shortfall will determine the kind of city it will be. Will it remain among the most diverse cities in the country, or will it become an economically homogeneous city only for the well-to-do who can afford hard-to-find housing? So this is an important discussion that goes beyond bricks and mortar and to the essence of what Jersey City will be. Here's our plan for today's program. We're going to start with a presentation of the RPA report. We're then going to hear from our panelists for approximately half an hour. Finally, we're going to open it up to the audience for a Q&A. Presenting the RPA report will be Marcel Negret. Marcel is Regional Plan Association Director of Land Use, where he's responsible for creating and managing long-term research projects on housing, economic development, and land use. Marcel has a master's degree in urban environmental systems from the Pratt Institute Graduate Center for Planning and the Environment, and holds a bachelor's from the School of Architecture and Design at the University of Andes in Bogota, Colombia. He is recipient of an American Society of Landscape Architects Research Honor Award. He also teaches at Pratt Institute's Graduate School of Architecture. I'm now pleased to turn it over to Marcel.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Good morning, and thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Marcel. I will present a quick overview of the report that Aaron mentioned. I have 15 slides packed with charts, maps, and a lot of statistics. If you have questions about the material or anything related to housing in Jersey, please submit them in writing into the chat, and we will try to address them during the Q&A portion of this event. You can also consult the report for free at RPA's website. Aaron, am I sharing my screen? Can you confirm if you're seeing my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Great, thank you. Jersey City is the second most populous city in the state of New Jersey. It's located on the Hudson River, and it is a vibrant place with one of the most diverse populations in the region. It has natural open spaces and culturally significant sites, several major employers and anchor institutions, and a robust public transit network that connects the city to New York City and the rest of the Garden State. These qualities make Jersey City an attractive place to live, work, and enjoy recreational activities. As Aaron mentioned, over the past decade, Jersey City has experienced a surge in development, which was marked by the rise of large residential towers, for the most part lining the waterfront. And yet, despite this increase in construction, the city has not kept up with the demand, and housing costs continue to rise. The high housing costs in Jersey City are primarily driven by the broader metropolitan housing deficit that has been caused by years of underbuilding. This deficit, together with the city's livable and accessible conditions, has further induced demand. Between 2010 and 2022, the number of housing units in Jersey City increased from 110,000 to 136,000, which represent a 24% increase. But at the same time, households or household formation increased from 93,000 to about 130,000, which represents a 41% increase. And that's 17 percent points more than the number of units that were created in the same period. Just simply put, the demand has been outpacing available supply. In terms of production, Jersey City has been punching far above its weight. Between 2010 and 2022, the city added 26,000 units, which is triple the per capita production observed in the larger metropolitan area. Jersey City added almost 90 units for every 1,000 residents, compared to the 28 units per 1,000 residents that were added in the metro area as a whole. Before we dive deeper into Jersey City, let's look at a minute at the statewide trends. When we compare the 1980s and 1990s in New Jersey as a whole, the 2000 and 2020s period saw 170,000 fewer incremental units added to the state housing stock. So the two periods here are represented in these new bar charts, the 80s and 90s on the left and the more recent decades on the right. You can see the right one is significantly lower than the left. That's about 170,000 fewer units, or 28% less. The red shade indicates urban centers like Jersey City and Hoboken and other larger municipalities, more populous municipalities in the state. Orange represents inner suburbs and yellow outer suburbs. And so in spite of the overall higher production in the urban centers like Jersey City, this has not compensated for the lower production observed in the suburban areas, which has likely contributed to a tighter market in Jersey City. In the past decade, the number of vacant units in the city has been reduced by 2/3, from approximately 17,000 in 2010 to just over 5,000 in 2022. Such trend indicates tightening market conditions. A healthy housing market typically shows a vacancy rate of between 5 to 8% for rentals and above 3.5 for ownership. While vacancy rates in Jersey City has seen a marginal increase up to 1%, 1% point for rentals in between 2022 and 2023, vacancy rates are still well below the recommended thresholds. And these tight market conditions have led to rents growing by 57% since 2015. Today, a typical rent is around $3,200 in the city, which is higher compared to most other cities in the vicinity and in Hudson County overall. You can see that trend growing substantially, but also more rapidly in the years that followed the pandemic. Jersey City, as I mentioned, is very well connected to the New York City Central Business District to the east and New Jersey communities to the west. The residents of the city benefit from easy access to major employment, education, and cultural centers within the city and surrounding areas through a range of transportation options, including the PATH, the Hudson Bergen Light Rail, New Jersey Transit buses, and ferries. Hundreds of thousands of jobs can be accessed in relatively short commute via PATH and light rail from the downtown and other parts of the city. And in fact, most of the housing units that have been built since 2010 have been concentrated in these areas that have good transit access to employment options. Furthermore, of the 26,000 units that were added in between 2010 and 2022, 19,000 units or 73% of that stock, or 3/4 of the new stock, have come in the form of large multifamily buildings, each with 20 units or more. So the type of development and the location of development could largely be considered transit oriented. RPA has always been a big supporter of transit oriented development. We think that, and we know there's evidence that creating housing in transit-rich areas has numerous benefits, including increasing walkability, lowering carbon emissions. So this trend is definitely a positive one. However, the changing housing units by number of bedrooms during the same period shows that 13,000 units, representing just over half of the total new stock, came in the form of one-bedroom apartments, which partly explains the shrinking size of households. Between 2010 and 2022, the average household size shrank from just over 2.5 residents per household to today at just around 2 residents per household. Back in 2012, Hurricane Sandy severely impacted the city and the surrounding area and the larger region. But we know that climate change impacts will continue to worsen with time. This map shows the projections for a 33-inch sea level rise that suggests that as many as 4,200 units could be permanently inundated or chronically inundated by the year 2070. Most of these units will be are near the Hudson and Hackensack rivers, as you can see in the map. The median household income in the city is around 91,000 compared to the state's just shy from 100,000. So it's like slightly below the state's median. If you look at the distribution of that income by neighborhoods or by census tracts, as shown in this map, the city shows a divide between higher and lower income neighborhoods, with higher income areas clustered near the Hudson waterfront and lower income neighborhoods concentrated around the Community Pond, Journal Square neighborhoods and other parts of the city. This income distribution reflects disparities by race and ethnicity to some degree, and also underscores, of course, the socioeconomic challenges that are faced by certain communities. 70% of the city's residents or households are renters. So it's a city predominantly of renters, with that share of renters increasing for households earning below the median income. So these bar charts are showing the household income by bands, though for those below the median income, highlighted with the bracket, and the shade of blue indicates the tenure, with a darker shade of blue indicating renters and lighter indicating owners. If you look at the bar chart further to the left, which represents households earning below 30% of the area's median income, so very low income households, you can see that the share of blue, dark blue, indicating renters is much higher. It's in that case is about 88% of the households in that income bracket are renters. Only 22% of households below the median income are homeowners. Just to compare those figures against the primary affordable program statistics in the city, there are approximately 12,000 units that are affordable. The largest source of affordable housing is from the public housing and LIHTC properties, or low-income housing tax credit properties, which add almost to 12,000 units. The city's housing authority manages about 2,200 units in public housing, and also issues housing choice vouchers for another 4,900 units. And more recently, the Jersey City Division of Affordable Housing has been overseeing approximately 1,600 income restricted units, of which 500 have been completed and are occupied. The remaining 1,000 units are in progress and span several stages of development, but are expected to be completed in the next couple of years. Just to compare these figures against the number of households that have incomes below the city's median income. We can say 36,000 households that are below the income are cost burdened. This represents 60% of households that are earning below the median income. This figure also is 3 times the combined stock of subsidized and income restricted units that I just went over in the previous slide. About 29,000 renter households are cost burdened, 27,000 of which are below the city's median income. And as you could see, the share of cost burden and severely cost burden, which the shades of color, red indicating severely cost burden, meaning if the household is paying 50% or more of their income towards housing costs, and yellow meaning that they're paying between 30 to 50% of their income towards housing costs. And you can see that share of severe cost burden increases as the income decreases. So that's one way to look at the gap, is comparing that cost burden by income band against the affordable housing programs that exist in the city. As mentioned earlier, there's also a market imbalance between housing stock creation and household formation, which has led to the low vacancies and the very limited options for relocating into the city, within or into the city. Based on historical population and job trends, projected into the near future, Jersey City can anticipate adding between 10 to 20,000 additional households over the next decade, which represents a growth of in between 8 to 50% in a 10-year period. So just to summarize and combine it all, we calculated current housing needs using numbers of units necessary to address overcrowded households, to achieve healthy vacancy rates, to permanently shelter and house population. And then we evaluated future needs, which are calculated based on potential household formation, natural attrition rates or dilapidation, and projected flood loss based on the 33-inch of sea level increase that I showed earlier. And together, these indicate that Jersey City could face a housing gap ranging between 27,000 to 36,000 units in the next decade. According to the Jersey City Division of Planning, there are about 14,000 units already approved or under construction, which would reduce the gap to about half the size. However, even if all the units under the pipeline were to be built in the next decade, the housing deficit would still range between 13,000 to about 22,000 units, even if those units in the pipeline are completed. And just to give a quick sense of that distribution of the need, this is how those numbers look in a pie chart, with the household formation representing more than just over half of the need. And that, again, this is the high end range that I mentioned, between 10 to 20,000 households could be formed in the next decade. That's one that will depend on how fast the economy grows in the next couple of years. So with that, we'll start the panel. I'll hand it back to Aaron. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Marcel. Now let me introduce the rest of today's panelists. Moses Gates is RPA's Vice President for Housing and Neighborhood Planning, leading the organization's planning, research, and advocacy efforts in affordable housing, economic development, and urban design. He is currently a visiting assistant professor at the Pratt Institute and serves on the board of directors for Neighborhood Housing Services of New York City. He has a master's of urban planning from Hunter College, a bachelor's in history from the University of Wisconsin, and is the author of the memoir, Hidden Cities. Nicole Vecchione is the Director of Research for the Eastern Region of Laborers International Union of North America, also known as LIUNA, where she has spent nearly 2 decades advancing the interests of workers through worker organizing and public policy advocacy. Her efforts have helped pass legislation in New York City to increase transparency in affordable housing construction and regulate labor brokers. She's also played a key role in recovering millions in stolen wages for workers in both New York City and Jersey City. Nicole is a board member of the New Jersey Schools Development Authority and a member of the Hudson County Affordable Task Force. She is also a leader of the Jersey City Brigade, LIUNA's grassroots volunteer and activist committee. She holds a bachelor's degree from Dickinson College and a master's of public administration from NYU's Wagner School of Public Service. Bill Massacutas is the founding partner of the public interest law firm Massacutas Fanchulo. Bill currently serves as the chairman of the Hudson County Executive Craig Guy's Affordable Housing Task Force. Bill previously served as Jersey City's Corporation Counsel and served in various capacities in state government during the administration of Governor Jim McGreevey, including as an assistant counsel of the governor and senior deputy attorney general. Okay, I'm going to start out today's discussion with this question. In your opinion, panelists, should Jersey City expand mandatory on-site affordable housing set-asides?
Well, any of us just jump in, I guess, as these go along. So, all right, I'll jump into this. I think it requires a nuanced answer. The one thing you want to do, and let me just take the backdrop and say, we heard this presentation based upon this extraordinary research done by the Regional Plan Association, and it's an honor to be participating in a panel with Regional Plan Association. I've been a big fan of all the work they've done over the years. But we saw this presentation that said, we built more housing here, but it's really expensive. And there's a debate, which I'm sure we'll talk about, to a certain extent in academia, but certainly on the street, where people say, hey, all this housing's being built, but it's gotten a lot more expensive here. So what can we do about it? I personally feel that we should be building more, but the question is what kind of building, and we'll talk more about that in detail. We saw one of the things I think we heard about here, and it's in the report, is that there's this disproportionate percentage of housing that's been one bedroom and studios. What kind of community is that really going toward? But if you come from the perspective, which I do, that we want to see more housing, but we also want to make sure it's affordable to a substantial percentage of our residents, we have to strike a right balance when it comes to this question. So I personally think that, yes, we want to have more mandatory on-site affordable housing, but in particular areas that can sustain it. We don't want to do something that's going to kill development. When I was the Corporation Counsel, I don't remember what year it was, but it was certainly probably in the beginning stages of the Healy administration. I remember studying it with people from the planning department about trying to insert mandatory affordable housing into certain redevelopment plans, particularly along the Hudson River waterfront. That concept did not get too far. I mean, the development community is like, you're going to kill development, and we backed off. And I think that's a legitimate concern. You look at certain areas that have tried to push a lot of affordable housing on site as a mandate for development, and I think it's slowed development down in certain areas. Portland, Maine is one area that's been looked at as an example of that happening. So look, we just did it in Journal Square. Jersey City did, the city government, in a couple of zones where there's a lot of demand. And I think you could probably do, and it's basically 10%. It can go to 15% if there's, depending upon the income of that, sort of the median income of that zone. I do think that there's other redevelopment plans along the waterfront that could sustain a mandatory affordable housing mandate, probably in the same neighborhood of 10%. There's some legal questions about whether or not that would be legally sustainable if you inserted it now, years after redevelopment plan was already in the works. I think it can, or it's worth the shot. So it's a long answer to say, yes, in distinct limited areas where there's clearly a high demand to live there, but only to the extent it will not thwart development overall.
So I'll jump in. Thank you, Bill. I'll first echo his sentiments to RPA. Thank you for the work you've done on this research, and thank you to Aaron for hosting this panel today. On mandatory inclusionary housing, I think it is one of an entire toolkit of tools that the city could pick up to increase affordable housing. There's clearly a need. Communities are being priced out of a place they've lived for a long time, and it's happening along racial demographics in a way that it's hugely problematic. If we want economically diverse communities, we have to build for them. And part of that is ensuring affordability of units. And part of that is ensuring that the folks that work in Jersey City can actually fit the size of the unit. A family squeezed into a 1-bedroom apartment is maybe not the best solution to keep people living in Jersey City. But I think that it's not the only tool, and it shouldn't be done in isolation. And I certainly think that there are real concerns about stifling development, but Jersey City, according to the report that RPA has put together, has increased its housing stock by 25% in the last couple of decades. I think that the demand is such that we can require something back from, real billionaires that are building here. It's not that there is a lack of profit on housing that's being built in Jersey City. And I would add to it this one other thought is that it should be scoped into the neighborhoods. Certainly the high demand areas, we can have 10, 15. I think you could probably get more in there. But if we're going to abide by redevelopment plans and redevelopment agreements that have been in existence for a very long time in Jersey City, these aren't plans that were set up 10 years ago. Some of them go back 30 years. I think we have to be able to look at those, and we have to be able to look at those in context with every other tool that's available to incentivize housing.
I mean, I think both of the previous panelists are largely right. The point I would make, though, is that inclusionary housing is largely a timing issue. It works very well in expensive neighborhoods where the land prices can sustain it, to create more economically diverse neighborhoods, which I think is a goal of everyone. And it works a lot less well in lower market neighborhoods, where it might stifle development. The problem is cities and markets change much quicker than government. So a lot of times, and we've experienced this not just in Jersey City, but in a lot of places throughout the region, a lot of times you're looking to kind of get ahead of the market when you're mapping out inclusionary zoning areas. A market pops, it gets built up, and now you're behind and you can't institute the inclusionary zoning retroactively. So it is very tricky to time, and it's especially very tricky to time because these public debates and passing the laws, oftentimes by the time you do it, you're already out of the market cycle and you're already on to, almost a whole different city. The interesting thing that Bill brought up that I wanted to expand on is some things change about housing. Rent changes often, prices change often. Some things don't change, and the size of units is much more difficult to change. So if you're building housing and the housing is expensive now, maybe a recession hits, maybe things change, maybe it becomes cheaper, maybe it becomes more expensive. It's very dynamic. If you're building only 1 and 2 bedrooms, those are 1 and 2 bedrooms 30 years from now. That's not a hard and fast rule. There is some flexibility with combining units or doing rehabs or things like that. But I think that that's a very important point that Bill made. If we're building too many 1 and 2 bedroom units, that's tough to get out of in the future. So if we're thinking about the kind of city, or Jersey City is thinking about the kind of city it wants to be, and if it wants to be, a more family-friendly city, not just for the population now, but the population in the future, that's something to really think about, is the size of the units that we're incentivizing.
Yeah,
Let me,
let me
oh,
just,
sorry, go ahead.
can I just say something real quick, Aaron, just real quick on this is just to I mean, 1 bedroom in studios, I think is sort of the bigger issue than two bedrooms. But you will probably bring this up later on, but just 2 quick things, which is, if we're going to mandate affordable housing, we have to think about the type of subsidy that we've been willing to go along with that. The pilots, payments in lieu of taxes or tax abatements, have been demonized on and off for years. For a certain amount of years. I mean, the Philip administration is like 13 years old. In the first 4 years, there was a lot. Then there was like a pride in not giving hardly any. Now we're seeing them again, I think exclusively for affordable housing. And I think that makes sense to be giving payments in lieu of taxes for affordable housing. And I think that's the trade-off that we can get. And just to piggyback one last thing on what Moses is saying is, and also dovetails into the subsidy issue, is we look at the most aggressive probably redevelopment plans with an on-site affordable housing mandate, and that's Bayfront, which is a very untested market. 90 acres of a former brownfield where there was just a groundbreaking the other day for the first project that's going to have more. I mean, I think it's got 35% affordable plus a bunch of workforce, but that project took years to happen. And it happened with extraordinary subsidy. I mean, there's a 30-year tax abatement. The land was sold for, I don't know if it was below market value, probably. And there's a third, I said a 30-year tax abatement. There's also a massive Aspire grant that is being paid up front through Hudson County full faith and credit guaranteed bond to the tune of $52 million. Whether or not that's going to be able to be replicated on the rest of the acreage on that area remains to be seen. But that's one spot where the city tried to do 35% affordable housing or some combo between 20% affordable, 15 workforce. And it took years to break ground, and it only is breaking ground because of extraordinary state and local subsidy.
Yeah, and I was going to follow up with another question, which this last discussion really begs, which is how do you find the right balance between incentivizing, production and getting this affordable housing? How do you avoid disincentivizing developers, assuming that this is all going to be mostly private development here? We're not doing government built housing here. We're doing private development. We've got to get developers to do this, and I can imagine developers who might be watching this are saying this all sounds this is all well and good, but how do we get the cap rate we need for our development? And maybe Moses, you could start out with what you've seen in other markets that works, maybe in where you run into problems.
One word, consistency. Consistency is what is needed more than any specific policy, because what ends up happening is if developers don't feel there's consistency, if they feel that either the incentives are going to get more and more and more generous, or if they feel the incentives are going to get more and more and more generous, you start to get speculation. And then you start to get a lot of pressure for those incentives to be more and more and more generous, which has an impact on the public coffers. If they feel the opposite, if they feel like the incentives are going to become less and less and less and less, then they're less likely to take the leap. If you have consistency, land prices will adjust, other things will adjust, and everybody kind of gets used to it and is able to operate in that system. It's when you have very frequent changes in the public subsidy ecosystem, and we've seen this in New York forever. That's when you start to get speculation, you start to get these weird boom and bust cycles that don't really depend on the market. They depend on when the subsidy programs are sunsetting. So that's the thing I would urge. It's not to say you can't tweak things, it's not to say markets don't change and maybe the right tax exemption now is slightly different from the right tax exemption going forward, but trying to avoid like real up and down, now there's a bunch of subsidy, now there's not. I would say that's the key, and just keeping that general steadiness.
Anybody else want to add to that, Bill or Nicole?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Moses. Consistency makes a lot of sense, but I think that those subsidies need to exist. That if it is in the public interest and the public cares about what our cities look like and who gets to live in them and how they get built, then we need skin in the game. And I think we need to think about that in terms of what already exists in the marketplace, right? You have state subsidies, you have city requirements, but how do we leverage them all together and in a consistent way would make sense. But I think it's key that we are a participant in the market so we can demand that buildings are built so that folks aren't getting displaced. Like we're still living in the fallout of redlining, which is a policy that was many, many years ago, but it's still impacting where people get to live and how they get to live. And I know one of the things that I've noticed in Jersey City too is the consistency of how rules are implemented for workers, it shouldn't be a rush to the bottom. And if the government is putting in money because people say it, then we can enforce laws that protect workers too. Like Jersey City construction job sites right now are fairly lawless. In the last couple of years, the DOL has issued something like 15 stop work orders. And I think part of like when we talk about affordable housing is also thinking about a key component of that is that people can afford to live it because they're making a decent wage. So I think that it's worth government subsidizing housing, both so that we control what is built and how it's built, and we can take care of folks that are building it and living in the housing.
Yeah, I would only add that I think you can have a general policy that is not nuanced with regard to subsidy. I'm thinking from a municipal perspective, specifically with regard to tax abatements, otherwise known as pilots, where you don't say, "Hey, they're evil. We're never doing them again," and we don't say, "Hey, they're great. We're going to hand them out like candy." And maybe we've seen sort of a mixture of the two. My over the years. I like them generally speaking. I mean, I was a bigger proponent of them back in the day because I thought, hey, we made a lot more. Actually, cities typically make more money than they because they don't share any of the money with the school. And I was working for municipal government. I also looked at the developments and I said, look, these developments that are coming online, by and large, they're not consuming municipal services as much as others, for better or worse, whether it's because they're not, typically the calls for the fire, the police, or putting kids in the schools. But more people, thankfully, are trying to raise their kids in school. I did think there should be some diversion of funds towards schools that were coming out of pilots. But so you can have a broader policy, but the good thing about, and the other thing I like what Nicole was saying is it gives the city some say in things, whether it's, hey, I need to get 5, 10, 7, 12% affordable housing, whatever it may be. During when I was a city attorney, we instrumented that if you're going to do a payment, a tax abatement, you have to do a project labor agreement and union labor. Very controversial, especially in the development community. It's definitely increasing the cost of construction, but it's also making sure that people that are doing the work are being paid a fair and living wage. It's making sure, from my perspective and experience, that construction is being done in a safe and superior product. And there's a variety of other things you can do. But look, each project has to be nuanced and looked at, and that's the good thing sort of about municipal government versus like federal. You can have a broader policy, but then zero in on each and every single one. But I mean, from the state's perspective, I think they need to keep pushing forward concepts like Aspire Grant if we want to see not leave it up to supply and demand to make sure that there's affordable housing inside of cities.
Moses, I want to follow up on something you brought up, which is consistency, and obviously abatements just came up. Are abatements part of creating the conditions for developers to come in and feel like they know what they're getting into from an investment perspective, and where do you think abatements make sense in your experience?
Yeah, I think exemptions make sense when you don't have land prices that can really sustain development. They make sense in kind of lower market areas to boost development. The thing I would caution about tax incentives, whatever they are, is any kind of tax incentive is essentially an investment in the future. You are trying to incentivize the ability to build housing now on the assumption that that building in the future will contribute back to the city by paying property taxes. So you forget, you try to boost it now for what you get later. This is just purely economics, forgetting about any, kind of social good of affordable housing. The biggest issue that happens is from a developer's perspective, from a time value of money perspective, $1 in 30 years is much less incentive than $1 today. But from a municipal government perspective, $1 lost in 30 years, that, in 30 years has the same impact on your budget. So, this is something we've experienced in New York City in tax exemption policy, a big kind of whirlpool to avoid is extending the life of the tax exemption further and further. You know, trying to get as much subsidy upfront as you can, maybe instead of extending tax exemptions further and further, start to look at, are there other ways of cutting out maybe a transfer tax or something like that out of the process upfront? It helps the developer a lot more, that dollar today, and it has less of a long-term impact on the city budget. So, you know, what I would say about tax exemptions is the amount of the exemption, you know, are you doing 10, 20, 30, 40%, what have you, or the amount of the pilot? That's something from a municipal perspective, I think is more important to look at rather than how long it is. I think the length is the thing to stay away from, not necessarily the amount today.
Great. Nicole, I've got a question for you. Maybe you could start off with this one. Um, how does Jersey City harness the construction boom, build more housing, and not do it at the expense of economically marginalized groups, and what is the interplay between the economics making neighborhoods and housing economically heterogeneous and inclusionary, and sort of the racial composition and ethnic composition of neighborhoods? Are there ways to preserve what many in Jersey City feel is just this wonderful polyglot of groups, and is there anything that can be done, or are we merely talking about just economic heterogeneity? What do you think about that, Nicole?
I don't I don't think that that's a foregone conclusion. I think that it takes investment in underserved communities. Where we see housing getting built now in Jersey City tends to be, right? Like we all saw the map where wealthier families live. It might not be that mandatory inclusionary housing is the right fit for lower income communities, but investment into those communities too that match the affordability requirements, um, to avoid gentrification, to avoid displacement of folks that already live in Communipaw, in Greenville, and to some extent the Heights, making sure that they have healthy, livable housing. And I think that comes back to investment again from the city, in partnership with whoever else we can leverage funds from. We have to be willing to put our money where our mouth is. And I think for me too, coming from a labor perspective, one of the public goods that I think should be associated with those incentives going into communities is a commitment to workforce development. I know at the labor is one of the programs we have is something called Pathways to Apprenticeship. It's a pre-apprenticeship program that not only tries to diversify trade unions to make sure that folks that are left out have the chance to become a union, but it matches that program with development happening now so we can go out into the community and find folks who are unjustly or unfairly impacted by economic conditions to give them the chance to have a decent job that is a career and a lifelong employment. With, I think, something that's critical about that is also access to family medical care and retirement plans so that we're feeding into the welfare of an entire family, both through good wages and healthcare, and generational wealth by making sure that the folks that enter the trades and build the housing that we all need to live in have an opportunity to continue to stay in that community as they get older.
Anybody want to add to this issue of sort of gentrification? That's really what, the issue is. And it's certainly a hot political, issue here in Jersey City. Can we
Well,
avoid?
I mean, you have to accept the premise to start off, which is that I mean, there is. I don't know if I understood the premise, which is the new development sort of speeding up gentrification, and there's a lot of people who would disagree. I'm sort of in between the two. I think depends how you look at it, both you know, with regard to the time span of it. I generally think that as Jersey City has succeeded in getting in development, as more and more people want to live in Jersey City, as we've seen a diversification of the city from an economic perspective with a lot more wealthy people living here. There's what some people call an amenity effect. There's definitely, from my perspective, over if you look back over 20 years, it's a more desirable place to live. There's been a lot of positives from this: more money for our tax base, more legitimate amenities, like whether it's restaurants and bars and such. We've seen so many positive developments in Jersey City over decades. Crime is, if you look at crime, 1985 versus 2025, there's a dramatic difference lower. And the mindset of people in America, they want to live in cities again. So whatever the reason is, Jersey City is a hot place to live, and that's one of the reasons why you're seeing an increased cost, housing cost. And some people who've been living like in a brownstone in Bergen Lafayette, or if they're in Paulus Hook over the years, and they said, hey, I own this place since 1968, and it was worth, 100K in 1985, and now I can get 2 million for it, or 1.8 million. Is that gentrification if they sell their house to somebody and they move out, and they've made sort of generational wealth almost by sitting on their brownstone. So there's a lot of mixed data on this and heavy debate. To me, regardless, I think that we should be welcoming development and promoting development, because one of the especially in a place like Jersey City. Some people, this is sort of a roundabout answer, but you think about the fact that we're finally seeing an increase in population in Jersey City over the last 15, 20 years. Jersey City's population, when my mother was born in Jersey City in 1933, was over 300,000 people, well over. And we had a ton of factories now. Like, we don't have that type of thing now. So we can support a lot more people here. We should be putting people here, as opposed to knocking down our few remaining farms to build McMansions and forests. So that's a good thing. The question is, now that we've seen this sustained development coming in over the years, that's, a lot of it being, as we talked about before, studios and one bedrooms, which is good. These people have helped, help stimulate a lot of other commercial and retail development. What can we do to pivot to try to at least make it affordable for working class people to live here? And I think that's the question we have to be, I think you're asking. So yeah, we have to think about out of the box things to try to maintain income diversity. I don't think just putting in more supply without regulation is the answer to that. I do think it overall will help at this juncture, but it's got to be more than that.
I mean, I'm very much a firm believer that the evidence shows that expensive new buildings are a symptom of gentrification and not a cause. They are the kind of thing that happens in high markets when they are allowed because of the price pressure for all the reasons that Bill described. And in high markets where they're not allowed, you just get higher and you just get more and more expensive housing. And, we see this all over the place. Think of a historic district that's gentrified where there's been no new buildings. It's not cheaper than a non-historic district where we've gotten a lot of new housing. It's gentrified the same. The market is, maybe a little different around the edges. And I do think new supply takes off some of that pressure around the edges, but it's largely the same. And the truism of housing and housing prices is it tracks the local economy. And land use can matter, but it matters a lot less in the local economy. And just think of the difference after COVID. Think of the difference in the Great Recession, in the housing markets, and it's it's very intuitive. One thing I will say is in terms of trying to maintain a good diverse city. And how prices relate to it. Like, everybody wants to sell their house for $1 million, but nobody wants to buy their house for $1 million. But yet, that's how housing works. But when you have a home ownership, that's the trade-off. You have folks who maybe can sell and benefit from that price appreciation and move somewhere cheaper, or you have folks who, if they want to stay, maybe they're not making a windfall, but they're home equity is as such that, you know, they can move up a little bit and stay. When you don't own your own home, when you're renting, you don't have that choice. You know, your only choice when price pressures increase is less room, overcrowding, or moving out. So I think that one of the big things that we need to focus on is, you know, how does everybody benefit from a rising housing market, or how do at least more people benefit, and how do working class folks benefit from a rising housing market? And the answer traditionally in this country has been home ownership, has been individual family home ownership. And there's other solutions. And, you know, different countries have different ways of kind of making sure everybody benefits from a rising housing market. But in this country, you know, it's been individual family home ownership. And I think that you know, putting in place some policies so that that gets developed, you know, enough of new home ownership opportunities for working folks get developed is a really important thing.
Could I respond?
Oh,
'Cause
go ahead, Nicole. I'm sorry.
I like what you guys were both saying. I think we do need to keep building. I don't think our only problem is, um, I don't think our only problem is just the lack of housing, but I think we also have an aging housing stock where folks are overcrowded and is not going to sustain communities forever in places that are being underinvested in Jersey City. And one of the points that you all made in the RPA report is looking at adaptive reuse and looking at places that still could sustain big growth. And I think that those are places that with incentives, like we talked about Bayfront, I know there's also Canal Crossing. There's huge potential in Jersey City to continue to construct. And doing that with the sort of regulations that invest back into the community and the workers building it, I think is one of the key issues of how you actually help working class people in Jersey City stay there and thrive.
Let me switch gears a little bit to rent control. Big issue in Jersey City recently. Been a lot of litigation going on concerning rent control. Um, I am curious what people think the relationship between rent control and housing construction and affordability. Well, obviously, I think the relationship between rent control and affordability is pretty clear, but in terms of development, you know, what's people's thoughts on that in terms of incentivizing new development? Anybody want to jump in there?
Well, it doesn't impact new development because there's a state law that limits rent control. You cannot have a rent control on new construction for 3 decades, 30 years. Uh, so it doesn't impact you know, all the buildings that you're seeing built up that are overwhelmingly rented since at least since the Great Recession that Moses reported to before. There was a period of time, there's a lot of condominiums being built and owned, but now the rentals, they're not impacted. Uh, I think that there's a question about whether or not there should there be any modification to rent control in Jersey City? Is rent control even good? There's a lot of arguments on both sides of the equation. Uh, you know, some would argue that rent control and the limited amount of income that people could make, or landlords can make, has kept renovations down, and it's led historically might have led to some of the problems we've seen in inner cities. I don't know if I buy that. Some people argue that it's not good because it's not means tested. There's two sides of that equation. I'm not a big fan of people having to like be de-incentivized to make more money to live where they live. I think that's, you know, a big problem where we see people who say, hey, if I make another 5,000 next year, I'm going to lose my health care and I'm going to lose my house. I personally think that here, I'll give you my take on it real quick, which is rent control as it stands today is a good thing. I mean, the controversial thing is not being enforced. A lot of landlords, I've litigated some things on behalf of some tenants. Um, Rent control, generally speaking, I think is a good thing. Maybe there's an argument to be made about some slight modification to make sure that buildings don't fall into disrepair. But a lot of people who live in Jersey City can still live here because of rent control. And I think that applies to New York. It definitely applies to right across the river to New York City as well. It only applies to larger buildings. We've seen a massive amount of acquisition of smaller buildings, like 4 units and less, that are shielded from rent control by I don't want to sound like a communist because I'm not saying this is a horrible thing, but corporate interest, corporate landlords. And that's where you've seen a lot of these, crazy 30, 50% rent increases in a year. Um, I don't think you should extend rent control, meaning the very, very rigid increases that we have in Jersey City, with the CPI, and it's very, very heavily regimented about what you can do if there's a vacancy and such. But I do think there should probably be some rent stabilization that extends beyond what we typically have today. So should people be getting a 30% rent increase? Probably not. I would consider that to be unconscionable. State law prohibits it, but you're going to have to jump into court. Maybe you can make that argument for new construction too, where new construction is not being forced to abide by the extremely rigid rent control laws. But should people be getting a 15% rent increase after their 2-year lease is up? I got an issue with that. I understand the market economy as well, but by and large, I think rent control is good, and maybe extend it, but not in the rigid way that it applies to older housing stock.
Of course, let me just jump in. I mean, the argument that landlords and investors would make, I got to channel them here, because I'm sure there are a few people from that group watching this webinar, is that you look at, New York and northern blue cities, and there's much less housing production than there is in, cities with far less in the way of rent control. And so that it appears to be a disincentive. Moses, do you have any take on that argument, that
I mean, I think the disincentives to building housing in the, Northeast are well, like rent control would fall 18th on that list. There's just a lot of other disincentives to that. And you can see this with looking at the suburbs. There's not in the New York suburbs, I should say, there's not no rent control in the New York suburbs. There are a few places, but it's a very small percentage of the housing stock. And the New York suburbs do way worse than New York City in housing production. So, if you look at it at that level, you look at it and you say, oh, rent control is an incentive.
in
And
that case, it may be NIMBYism that's in play, right? I mean, is that
exactly. I think that the two biggest things when it comes to housing production are zoning and the economy. I mean, that's the two things that matter 98% of the whole thing. And by the economy, I mean not just how the local economy is doing necessarily, but also the local costs and the economics of building anything. And those are the two big things. When it comes to rent control or rent stabilization, as we have mostly here in New York, the biggest thing really is, again, steadiness. If landlords think that the laws are going to get more and more and more constrictive, it's a real incentive to disinvest and kind of try to think about walking away from the buildings. If they think it's going to get looser and looser and looser, and this was the case for a good period of time in the 90s and 2000s in New York, you start to see a lot of speculation, a lot of displacement, a lot of pressure against tenants. So, I think Bill is exactly right. It doesn't take place until 30 years in the future, which has a minimal impact on your underwriting today. And the key, again, is to not get caught up in the wild swings and try to, have it be steady. I think Jersey's approach to rent control has largely worked. And I think housing production in Jersey is, much more, it's much greater than housing production on the New York side of the river. And despite many more municipalities on the New Jersey side of the river having rent stabilization. Should probably, I would say, continue much as it is, would be my guess.
Great. Nicole, do you want to just jump in with something real short? Then we've got to move to the Q&A. I'm sure you have something to say about rent control.
No, I don't think I have a lot more to add except that whatever sort of rent regulations we have, whether it's rent control, rent stabilization, like whatever they are, they should be consistent, both so developers know what they're getting into, and also for the folks that have to live in those apartments. That's really the fair way to go about it.
All right. Well, that concludes our sort of give and take between me, moderator, and the panel. Thank you so much. We're going to move to the Q&A from the audience. I've got some questions here. The first one is for Nicole. Are you arguing that we should tear down older housing stock, much of which,
No.
uh, wait, let me finish the question.
Okay.
Okay, so it's a somewhat long question. So here I'm going to give you the question. Are you arguing that we should tear down older housing stock, much of which is affordable, and replace it with new construction? I want to make sure I am not misinterpreting her statements, your statements, Nicole, as this seems to be counterproductive, especially because housing is a durable good and many of the older units are more readily available than new affordable housing production. That was a mouthful, but did you get that, Nicole?
I got it. No, I'm absolutely not advocating for tearing down any housing. But I do think it's a reality that we have to face. Older housing needs to be upkept. And whether that's adaptive reuse of industrial areas or converting commercial properties that aren't being utilized as much, I think that should 100% be on the table, and a thing that we're exploring. How do we do that as a community in a way that benefits everyone? But I think that one of the issues with an aging affordable housing stock is there have to also be ways to upkeep it. And that could require more incentive from cities to help maintain those units, because even if they have good bones, things need to be updated. A stove from 30 years ago should be replaced. Cabinets need to be updated. Bathrooms need to be updated. Um, and I guess that's not a new development, but it is revitalizing housing that exists now. I think people that live in old housing deserve the benefits that come from new development too in the places they already exist.
I'm going to jump in. It's time for a little controversy and disagree with my friend
Yeah.
Nicole. I think that there's absolutely appropriate times to tear down old housing and build new housing for a lot of different reasons. Whether it's the quality of the housing or the density of the housing for certain areas. Like I do think that scale of neighborhood is something that there's a lot of variables that as a citizen or as a government official, you should take into effect. I don't, I do believe that there's a sense of place for certain areas that shouldn't necessarily be bulldozed down to just build high rises. Whether think about West Village or Paula Sook or something like that. Like, I don't think I think it's radical. But I do think that the 2060 General Square redevelopment plan was absolutely the right thing to do. And the 2060 General Square redevelopment plan said, here we have this area that used to be the center of the city, but it's got a path station, it's got a bus station, and there's a lot of like low density housing. Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense in a state that has been embracing, promoting, and screaming about the benefits of transit-oriented development. So I think that redevelopment plan made sense. It incentivized developers to go in and buy smaller, older housing, knock it down, and build new housing that brought a lot more people in that are not using cars, that are bringing economic vitality into Journal Square. I understand, the concerns, but I think that the net positive is clear. And there's a lot more money coming into the city coffers as a result of that development. There's a lot more people living there's just a lot of positives that come out of it. And you can have a mixture up there. I think it's kind of funky and cool, like Jane Jacobs used to say, to have diversity of housing where you have some, and in Jersey City's always had this. You've had a string of blocks where you had two family, two family, two family, 20 family, two family, two family, 20, mix it up. And there it's what Moses said it. We know what pushed it there, and occasionally you can also use eminent domain to get it done if you need to. But like Moses said, it was two things: it was zoning and the economy. both broadly and locally. I mean, when the first zoning was put in place at Journal Square, there wasn't, there was the Great Recession, and it didn't happen right away. And finally, you saw the first ones, starting to come in, and they were also helped by abatements.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move to the next question. Beyond, and this is to the group, beyond mandated inclusionary housing, what are the solutions? Not all developers are billionaires. How do we make these asks of certain developers so that our city is more equitable without stopping development?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, I think it's tricky. I think when it comes to affordable housing, we have a real tried and true playbook, of low-income housing tax credits and other subsidies, and a lot of nonprofit, especially developers who really know what they're doing. And it largely works. And the playbook's pretty good. Uh, the problem is that it's a very small percentage of the housing stock, and it's going to continue to be a very small percentage of the housing stock. And you have to figure out how the larger housing stock, which is, 90% plus just regular old market rate rental sales, how that can actually work for the majority of, folks in a city. And it's very difficult. And the local government has limited tools when it comes to this. Lots of it is driven by real country, if not worldwide, macroeconomic trends, right? And there is only so many things that the local government is going to be able to do about growing income equality or the loss of manufacturing jobs or things like that. The tool that local governments have is to some extent budgetary, and you can put in, some money towards affordable housing programs. But the big tool they have is land use and land use regulations. So it's not a surprise that most local governments are looking to how land use regulations can help the overall housing market, by loosening them, by putting strings like inclusionary zoning on them. Whatever the case may be. And I think there's been a lot of attention to the land use side of things. Everything is a trade-off, and there's folks that don't like to see more housing and land use changes, and that's a little bit of a give and take. But I think the point I want to make is the attention is good. Like the focus on how local governments can help the housing crisis through land use changes. It's not a straightforward answer, and I don't want to present it's like get rid of zoning and everything will be great, and again, it's one piece of the puzzle. But I would just say keep the attention on it, keep the conversation going, keep the academic literature looking at it. And that's the way to move forward, even if it's it's a difficult question.
Thank you. All right, another question, which we've already touched on to some degree, or you've touched on to some degree. Um, it relates to disincentivizing the building of new housing. If the primary takeaway from this report is that Jersey City needs to build more housing, why is the prescribed solution something that will harm housing production by increasing the cost? It seems some panelists feel that they can probably impose stricter requirements on the market without suffering any consequences. But aside from that being a nice thought, what specific evidence supports that statement? Nicole, Bill, you want to jump in first?
I'll just say that you're seeing development now with one thing Jersey City did was they with the first iteration wasn't a success of the inclusionary zoning ordinance. It was challenged in court by Fair Share Housing. Now we got a new one that basically triggers in a mandatory affordable housing if you tweak the zoning regulation. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it in Bergen Lafayette. We're seeing it in other areas of the city. I think that the evidence is there that for the strong markets, the strong mini markets within Jersey City, a Newport versus a Bayfront or certain subzones with, Journal Square is such a big redevelopment area. It's got subzones within it that you can mandate affordable housing to a certain extent. And the other thing is, zoning and land use. Do we want to have another? Do we want to have, if we have another 10,000 units? Do we still want, which I think we do? Do we still want the lion's share to be studios and one bedrooms? I don't know. I think that's a question for. I think not. And that's a question to ask as well. But um, yeah, turn it over to.
Could I also respond? I think that the takeaway of the report is build more housing, but the perspective I'm bringing to this is not to build more housing at any cost, but rather to build housing that suits the community where it's being built. And I think that when I think about changing zoning laws and zoning to help development build, I feel that that is a benefit that we're inferring to folks developing, and the community should get something back from that. I wouldn't want another 10,000. I want another 10,000 units of housing, but not the exact same way we got these 10,000s. I think there have been real human cost to the housing that's built in Jersey City that shows that it is a market failure that requires a market intervention. I'll speak from the perspective I know really well, and that's the folks that are building this housing. I think that you might have seen a lot of inhumanity of how workers have been treated in this country in the last couple of weeks. And the sad truth is, though, if you look up the skyline in Jersey City and all that new housing, that inhumanity that people are experiencing, they have been experiencing for years in Jersey City. When a worker tries to stand up for their rights on a job site, and for better or worse, right now, that's largely a lot of immigrant workers in Jersey City. When they ask for the wages that have been stolen from them, when they ask for better safety on job sites, when they try to unionize, almost universally, the first thing that they're going to hear from an employer is, well, I'm going to call ICE. And then the second thing that they're going to hear is that they've lost their job. And I think that's one piece of things that are going wrong in construction in Jersey City right now. But it just goes to the point that we have laws for a reason, and we have those because we want to have a say in how our city is built. So do I think we need more housing, and should we incentivize for it, and should we work with developers so that they build good housing and they have good construction? Yes, but it's not at any cost. I think that the benefits have to weigh out.
Got it. Thanks, Nicole. Next question. Do we have any ideas about why most of the units being built are small units? Are there things that drive construction costs up for larger units that can be fixed? Anybody got an opinion on that?
I'll give you a 1 minute one. Having lived in one of these apartments, and down right on the border of Liberty Harbor and Paul's Hook, at 225 Grand Street, that had a lot of one bedrooms and studios and two. But that's where the market is. That's where, at the time, the developers felt like, who wants to live here? And I think it's two broad categories. It's young people who are working, a lot of them in New York City, some of them at home, and again, the mindset has changed. People want to live in cities again, which is a great thing. People are less prejudiced, they're less racist. They don't want to, the suburbs doesn't have the same allure, at least up until a certain age. So you've got a lot of people, they're not all finance pros, but you got a fair share of them. But you got all kinds of industries of people that are doing, and then you got a lot of empty nesters. You go in an elevator in one of these buildings, you're going to see like empty nesters and a lot of young people. Less people raising kids. There's some, but they're not a lot. I mean, look, people are having less kids. There's still the school challenge here. We've seen the population of Jersey City go up substantially, but our public school population go down. But the short answer is that's the market.
Got it. We have a lot of questions left, so I'm going to jump in I know, Moses, you wanted to say something, but I would love to get to all of the questions if we can. So I'm going to ask you to keep your answers as brief as possible. I know you guys are experts in this and could probably go on for quite a while and have a passion for the subject, but we need to keep it short right now because we have a lot of questions left and I'd like to try and get to everybody. So I'm going to put it out to everybody, but just keep your questions, your responses as short as possible if you could. Okay, Moses, I'll put this to you. So you're on deck. The RPA report is focused on Jersey City. But should we have a larger conversation about building housing in the region? Jersey City can't build the region's demand. New York City has hundreds of new units coming online in a city that needs hundreds of thousands. North Jersey, by some estimates, needs 200,000 of just affordable units. Jersey City can't house the region. What's the responsibility of public officials in other domains? Moses, to you.
Keeping it short, the answer is yes, 100% absolutely. The answer is also thank you, Jersey City, for building not just for yourself, but also to absorb, a lot of the demand of the region. The issue is not necessarily this city versus that city. The cities are doing pretty good. Jersey, not just Jersey City, Newark is doing really good. I think if the local economy of Paterson starts to pick up, you'll see a lot, see Paterson doing good. And New York City actually doesn't do that bad. New York City does pretty good. The issue is the suburbs do not build any housing. Mostly on the New York side of the line, Mount Laurel keeps the suburbs building housing in New Jersey. But that is, where a lot of the demand that is being unmet. So, we are big proponents of Mount Laurel. We think it works great in New Jersey. Not saying that there aren't different tweaks that could or couldn't be done with it, but the general idea of that statewide framework for housing construction, we really like, and we'd love to see it on the New York side of the river and think it would help solve a lot of problems.
All right, thank you. Um, okay, here's sort of this looks like a technical question. There are new market rate units being built in parts of Jersey City that are affordable at 80% of AMI. Jersey City's current regulations on the distribution of very low, and moderate income housing would make the production of those buildings impossible. Is that a reasonable trade-off? Also, doesn't new production make existing supply more affordable and make it more likely that people are readily able to find a place to live? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I think it's Moses wants to answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that new construction, is generally towards the top of the market and generally helps at the top of the market in terms of relieving price pressures, and that for the lower segment of the market, you need a lot of purpose-built affordable housing. As a late friend of mine once said, the best way to create affordable housing is to create affordable housing. And so I think, both are definitely needed.
Right. So I guess, another way of phrasing that question is that it doesn't seem like we're really addressing the most marginalized communities in Jersey City. That 80% of AMI is maybe too high. That's, I guess, been a complaint. This is just me adding a note. That's something I've heard as a reporter on these subjects.
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, it is very difficult. You want to address the need, but because of the increasing construction costs, the increasing, bifurcation of the market, it's much, much more expensive than it used to be. And I think the problem is less about the government response to it and more the fact that more and more middle and working and lower class people don't have any possibilities on the private market like, in decades past they did.
Okay, I'm going to make this the last question. My producer is telling me we've got to start winding down. We did say it was going to end at 12:30. Um, okay, here's one. How do we disaggregate how much of the production was due to redevelopment zones, federally qualified opportunity zones, and other strong market conditions that made some of these affordable housing projects pencil out? Another, fairly
Can
fairly
can you
question.
repeat that?
Yeah. how do we I think the question is, have we been able to attribute the development that's taken place to these very aggressive incentives like federally qualified opportunity zones, redevelopment zones, and other strong market conditions? Um, you know, so I guess the question is, yeah, right. How much of this great production that Jersey City has had over the last so many years is attributable to these programs? Any idea, what would have happened if they had not been in place, those programs? Those,
There's a lot of different programs, but I think it's primarily market driven. I think it's market driven. I heard recently say, hey, there's been, and Jersey City has a lot of benefits. It's got the multiple pass stations. I heard recently say, hey, we had pass stations for years. But the big thing is that the mindset of people has changed. People want to live in the cities again. You see it in Nashville, you see it in Philly, you see it in Boston, you see it in Huntsville, Alabama, you see it in Atlanta, Georgia. Thankfully, people want to live in cities again because it's better for the large part. There's so many positive things about living, and I'm not saying that the suburban living is totally bad, but it's primarily like opening up zoning for it. I mean, back, I would say 30 years ago, when Jersey City was heavily subsidizing development via pilots, I would say it played a big role. Some people talk to subsidies in the 80s that helped the brownstones get renovated, which, what came first? Was it developments like Newport, or was it the brownstone renovation, that sort of seeing Jersey City improve, aka gentrify? It depends upon your perspective. And my perspective, it's largely improve. Heavily it's improved in my opinion. So I don't think it's, government stuff has played a role, but it's like 80% market, and government should be making zoning, getting out of the way, and helping facilitate things. I mean, there's like problems like at the building department, probably, and helping those things that no one talks about. It might have a bigger role than other stuff, but.
great. Nicole, you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I do think that it's mostly market driven. And I think that's why so much of this conversation has been about what do we get out of the incentives that we offer, because development is happening anyway. So if we are putting skin in the game that is public money or public assistance, how are we helping shape it so that it most benefits the community?
Great, great. Well, I think that unless you guys want to add anything that hasn't been said that you were chomping on the bit to say, I think that pretty much concludes our program. We're ending a little bit early, a few minutes early. I want to thank all of you, for this incredible presentation. It was in depth and it covered a wide range of topics. As to additional questions, some of the questions that were put in were not answered. There should be an email address in the chat for everybody who wants to ask a question of the RPA or any of the panelists. I'm sure I'm speaking without having asked you first, Bill and Nicole, whether you're willing to field questions, but I would imagine you are. So please avail yourself of that email address. For all of you who attended this webinar today, this first Jersey City Times webinar with the Regional Plan Association, I can't thank you enough. I hope this has been educational, interesting, and food for thought for this incredibly important subject. So thank you so much. All our panelists, all of the people that attended, and all the folks behind the scenes at Regional Plan Association who helped out. Okay, so everybody have a great day, and let's keep the conversation going. Okay.